What is up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brother 6 here, once again, with your weekly dose of history for the History Armada. Today we're going to be talking about the War of the Roses, the English Civil Wars, what they were, and a brief summary of what they were, what they did, and what they caused, and what the importance of the War of the Roses is. So with that, let's get started for today. The Wars of the Roses expand roughly from 1455 to 1485. In English history, the series of dynastic civil wars whose violence and civil strife preceded the strong government of the Tudors, fought between the House of Lancaster and the House of York for the English throne. The wars were named many years afterwards for the supposed badges of the contending parties, the White Rose of York and the Red of Lancaster. The name and symbols, like I said. The name War of the Roses refers to the heraldic badges associated with the two royal houses, the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster. The Wars of the Roses came into common use in the 19th century after the publication in 1829 of Anne of Gerstein by Sir Walter Scott, a popular novel that brought up the prevalence of these badges. Sir Walter Scott based the name on a scene in William Shakespeare's play, Henry VI, Part 1, set in the gardens of the Temple Church, where a number of noblemen and lawyers pick red or white roses to show their loyalty to the Lancastrian or the Yorkist faction, respectively. So the Yorkist faction used the symbol of the White Rose from early in the conflict, but the Lancastrian Red Rose was only apparently introduced only after the victory of Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth, when it was combined with the Yorkist White Rose to reform the Tudor Rose, which symbolized the union of the two houses, which we'll get back to later. So, with the combination of the White Rose and the Red Rose, the origins of the Rose as a cognization itself stems from Edward I's use of the Golden Rose stalked proper. Often owing to nobles holding multiple titles, more than one badge was used. Edward IV, for example, used both his son of Splendor as Earl of March, but also his father's Falcon and Fetterlock as Duke of York. Badges were not always distinct, and at the Battle of Barnet, Edward's son was very similar to the Earl of Oxford's Fair Star, so there can be fatal confusion, which is why he combined the two roses and made it very prevalent which side was which. Most, but not all, of the participants in the wars wore livery badges associated with their immediate lords or patrons under the prevailing system of bastard feudalism. The wearing of livery was by now confined to those in continuous employment of a lord, thus excluding, for example, mercenaries, etc. Another example was Henry Tudor's forces at Bosworth fought under the banner of a red dragon, while the Yorkist army used Richard III's personal device of a white boar. So you can see how they used the immediate symbol of their immediate employer. Although the names of the rival houses derived from the cities of York and Lancaster, the corresponding duchy and dukedom had little to do with those actual cities. The land and offices attached to the Duchy of Lancaster were mainly in Gloucestershire, North Wales, and Cheshire, while the estates and castles of the Duke of York were spread throughout England and Wales, although many were in the Welsh marshes. So the war. Richard, Duke of York, led a small force toward London and was met by Henry's forces at St. Albans, north of London, on the 22nd of May, 1455. The relatively small first battle at St. Albans was the first open conflict of the Civil Wars. Richard's aim was ostensibly to remove poor advisors from King Henry's side. The result was a Lancastrian defeat. Several prominent Lancastrian leaders, including Somerset and Northumberland, were killed. After the battle, the Yorkists found Henry hiding in a local tanner's shop, abandoned by his advisors and servants, apparently having suffered another bout of mental illness. He had also been slightly wounded in the neck by an arrow. York and his allies regained their position of influence. With the king indisposed, York was again appointed protector, and Margaret was shunted aside, charged with the king's care. For a while, both sides of the Civil War were shocked that an actual battle had been fought and did their best to reconcile their differences because they did not want actual bloodshed. They just wanted their rights and their positions to be seen. But the problems that caused conflict soon re-emerged, particularly the issue of whether the Duke of York or Henry and Margaret's infant son Edward should succeed to the throne. Margaret refused to accept any solution that would disinherit her son, and it became clear that she would only tolerate the situation for as long as the Duke of York and his allies retained the military ascendancy. Henry recovered, and in February of 1456, he relieved the Duke of York of his office of protector. In the autumn of that year, Henry went on to a royal progress in the Midlands, where the king and queen were very popular. Margaret did not allow him to return to London, where the merchants were angry at the decline in trade and widespread disorder from the lack of government due to the Civil War. The king's court was set up at Coventry. By then, the new Duke of Somerset was emerging as a favorite on the royal court. Margaret persuaded Henry to revoke the appointments York had made as protector, while York was made to return to his post as lieutenant in Ireland. Disorder in the capital and the north of England, where fighting between the Nevilles and Percys had resumed, and piracy by fleets on the south coast were growing, but the king and queen remained intent on protecting their own positions rather than England and its priorities. They were very much rather make sure they got to keep the wealth and power that they had experienced than protect the trade and prosperity of their nation. So, with that, the Queen introduced conscription for the first time in England. Meanwhile, York's ally Warwick, later dubbed the Kingmaker, was growing in popularity in London, and as the champion of the merchants, and also as captain of Calais, he had fought piracy in the Channel, gaining him a lot of support by the merchants, the common folk, and other lords. In the spring of 1458, Thomas Bourchier, the Archbishop of Canterbury, attempted to arrange a reconciliation. The lords had gathered in London for a grand council, and the city was full of armed retainers. The Archbishop negotiated complex settlements to resolve the blood feuds that had persisted since the Battle of St. Albans. Then, on Lady Day, the 25th of March, the king led a Love Day procession to St. Paul's Cathedral with Lancastrian and Yorkist nobles following him hand in hand. No sooner had the procession and council dispersed, plotting resumed. Which leads on to our other conflict. The conflict of this war lasted with sporadic episodes and often on cold and warm episodes between 1455 and 1487. However, there was fighting before and after this period between the houses and its supporters. The power struggle ignited around social and financial troubles following the 100 Years' War, combined with the mental infirmity and weak rule of Henry VI, which revived interest in Richard of York's claim to the throne. Historians disagree about whether the Wars of the Roses were caused by the structural problems of feudalism or the actual ineffectiveness as king of Henry VI. Whether it be his ineffectiveness or the problems of feudalism, it is very unclear, but it is clear that there was enough strife in England that a long and complex civil war had to break out in order to reconcile in a new form. So with the Duke of York's death, the claim transferred to his heir, Edward, who later became the first Yorkist king of England, and as Edward IV. His son reigned for 78 days as Edward V. But Parliament then decided that Edward and his brother Richard were illegitimate, and offered the crown to Edward IV's younger brother, Richard III. And it also believed that Richard III actually planned this with Parliament to get rid of it so Richard could become king, and the two young princes were then dispersed of and disappeared within the confines of the Tower of London, supposedly held there by their uncle, Richard III. So here you can see a map of the loyalties of the Civil War. You can see the dark blue in the top is Scotland, the brown all over the English main body there is the House of York, the yellow is House of Lancaster, which you can see a lot more support of in Ireland, mainland, and even France. And then the light green in Southern Ireland would be the Duchy of McCarthy. The orange in the top would be Kingdom of Ulster. And then the Duchy of Brittany is down below, as well as the Kingdom of France, which did support the Lancasters. And then there was also the Welsh Rebellion going on at the same time, because the Welsh believed they had the right to their own independence. And there was also the Kingdom of Connacht in the western part of Ireland. So you can see where the loyalties lie here on this fabulous map, where and how the different parties supported each other on this map. So the Tudor. As Richard's right to the throne became tenuous, the Lancastrian Henry Tudor, with the help of France and many nobles, as I said, staked his claim to the crown. He met Richard on the battlefield at Bosworth on August 22nd, 1485. The final victory went to the claimant of the Lancastrian party, Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, who defeated the last Yorkist king, Richard III, at the Battle of Borthwick Field. After assuming the throne as Henry VII, he married Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter and heir of Edward IV, thereby uniting the two claims and the two families. The House of Tudor ruled the Kingdom of England until 1603, with the death of Elizabeth I, granddaughter of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. And his son is a very famous king you all probably know, Henry VIII. Yeah, that's right, Henry VIII, the one with a lot of sons. So this is his father, Henry VII, who establishes that family line, the Tudors, after the War of the Roses. And after fighting valiantly, Richard III was killed. Legend has it, his crown was placed upon Henry's head at the very spot where Richard fell on the battlefield. Henry was then declared King Henry VII of England. The union ended the War of the Roses and gave rise to the Tudor dynasty, and the rest is history, as they say. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Shield Brother 6 with your weekly dose of history. I hope you learned something about the War of the Roses. I hope you learned a little something about English history, and I hope you enjoyed. If at any time you did enjoy it, go ahead and leave me a like. If you didn't, go ahead and leave me a dislike. And if you have a comment, suggestion, or concern, you can leave that down below for me in the comment section. And as always, this has been Shield Brother 6 with your weekly dose of history, and I'll catch y'all next time.